The small town of Riverdale sat nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, a place where everyone knew each other's business and where traditions ran deep. It was a town built around the steel mill that employed most of the adults, and a town that lived and breathed sports. From the moment children could walk, they were handed footballs, basketballs, and baseball mitts. Sports weren't just activities in Riverdale, they were the heartbeat of the community. In a modest two-story house on Maple Street lived the Chen family. Unlike many families in town, they didn't have sports trophies lining their shelves. Instead, they had books, art supplies, and in the corner of their small living room, an old upright piano that had belonged to Grandma Chen before she passed away. Lynn was 6 years old when she first felt drawn to that piano. While other kids her age were running around playgrounds and kicking balls, she would stand in front of the piano, her small fingers hovering over the keys. There was something about it that called to her, like it held secrets waiting to be discovered. "Would you like to try it?" her mother asked one rainy afternoon, noticing how Lynn kept circling the piano during playtime. Lynn nodded, her eyes wide. Her mother lifted her onto the bench, which was far too high for her little legs. She pressed a key and the sound rang through the room. Then another and another. There was no melody, no rhythm, just the pure joy of discovery. "My mother used to play," her mother said softly, watching Lynn explore the keyboard. "She always said music was a way to speak without words." That evening, when Lynn's father came home from his shift at the mill, tired and covered in the day's work, Lynn proudly showed him how she could press the keys to make sounds. He smiled, the weariness momentarily lifting from his face. "Maybe she has Grandma's gift," he said to his wife later that night, when they thought Lynn was asleep. But she heard them, and those words planted a seed. The following week, her parents scraped together enough money for Lynn to take lessons with Mrs. Patel, an older woman who lived 3 blocks away and taught piano in her spare time. The first lesson was awkward. Lynn's feet couldn't reach the pedals and her fingers struggled to stretch across even the simplest chords. But Mrs. Patel was patient. "Playing piano is like telling a story," Mrs. Patel explained. "Each note is a word, each measure a sentence. Right now you're learning the alphabet. Soon you'll be telling whole stories." Lynn loved that idea. While she was quiet at school, often overshadowed by louder, more athletic classmates, on the piano she could express things she didn't have words for. The years passed, and Lynn's connection to the piano deepened. By age 9, she could play simple classical pieces and had started to understand music theory. Her parents watched her progress with quiet pride, though they worried sometimes about how different her interests were from other children in town. "Maybe we should encourage her to try soccer too," her father suggested one evening. "It might help her make more friends." But whenever they brought up the idea of sports, Lynn's face would close off, and she'd retreat to the piano. It was her refuge, her friend, her voice. When Lynn turned 11, the old piano began to show its age. Keys would stick, and the sound wasn't as clear as it once was. Her parents noticed how frustrated she'd get when the instrument couldn't keep up with her growing skills. One evening, they sat her down at the kitchen table. "We've been saving," her mother began, exchanging a look with her father. "For what?" Lynn asked, picking at her dinner. "For a new piano," her father said. "Well, not brand new, but better than the one we have." Lynn's chopsticks clattered to the table. "Really? But I thought we were saving for a new car." Her parents shared another look. The family car was 15 years old and made concerning noises whenever it went over 40 miles per hour. They'd been putting aside money for a replacement for nearly 2 years. "The car can wait," her mother said simply. "Your music can't." 2 weeks later, a second-hand upright piano was delivered to their home. It wasn't fancy or new. The wood was scratched in places, and it had clearly been well used. But when Lynn sat down and played her first chord, the rich, full sound brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. From then on, Lynn practiced with renewed dedication. 2 hours every day after school, sometimes more on weekends. Her fingers grew stronger, more nimble. She began to tackle more challenging pieces, feeling a rush of accomplishment with each new mastery. At school, though, things were different. As middle school began, the social divisions became more pronounced. Athletes were at the top of the hierarchy, with everyone else fitting in wherever they could.
Lynn, with her quiet nature and unusual hobby, didn't fit neatly anywhere. "What did you do this weekend?"
a classmate might ask on Monday morning. "I practiced piano," Lynn would answer truthfully. would come the response, followed by a quick change of subject. It wasn't that her classmates were mean, at least not most of them. It was more that they didn't understand. In a town where Friday night football games were practically religious events and sports scholarships were the dream of many parents, Lynn's dedication to piano seemed strange, even foreign. When she was 13, Mrs. Patel suggested Lynn enter a regional music competition. "You have real talent," Mrs. Patel told her. "You should share it with more than just me and your parents." The competition was held in a neighboring city, larger and more diverse than Riverdale. For the first time, Lynn found herself surrounded by other young musicians who understood her passion. They talked about composers and techniques, compared calluses on their fingertips, and shared their dreams of music schools and concert halls. Lynn didn't win. She placed 4th out of 12 participants, but she came home with something more valuable than a trophy, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. "There are others like me," she told her parents excitedly on the drive home. "Kids who love music the way I do." Her mother smiled from the front seat. "Of course there are, sweetheart. The world is a big place." By 14, Lynn had outgrown Mrs. Patel's teaching. She had learned everything the kind woman could offer, and they both knew it. Her parents found a more advanced teacher in the city, which meant a 40-minute drive twice a week. They never complained about the extra gas money or time, even when it meant her father had to take on additional shifts at the mill. "Your talent is a gift," her father told her once, when she expressed guilt about the sacrifices they were making. Gifts aren't meant to be hidden away. Lynn's new teacher, Mr. Walsh, was more demanding than Mrs. Patel had ever been. He assigned complex pieces that required hours of practice to master even short sections. He critiqued her posture, her fingering, her interpretation. But he also opened up new worlds of music to her, introducing her to composers and styles she hadn't explored before. "You have something special," he told her after a particularly good lesson, "a sensitivity to the music that can't be taught. But you need to be braver. You play beautifully when it's just you and me in this room. But will you be able to do the same in front of an audience?" It was a good question. Lynn had performed at recitals, of course, but always small affairs with supportive parents and fellow students. The thought of playing in front of her school peers made her stomach twist with anxiety. At home that night, as she practiced a particularly difficult passage of a Chopin nocturne, Lynn thought about Mr. Walsh's words. Was she brave enough to share her music with people who might not understand or appreciate it? The question lingered as her fingers moved across the keys, drawing out melodies that spoke of both doubt and determination. She didn't know yet that in just a few weeks, she would have to find an answer to that question. She didn't know that her school would announce a talent show, or that she would feel a pull to participate despite her fears. She didn't know that she would face mockery from those who saw her passion as strange and foreign. But as she played into the evening, something inside her was already preparing for that moment, gathering strength, finding resolve. The music flowing from her fingers wasn't just notes on a page. It was her voice waiting to be heard. The announcement about the school talent show came on a drizzly Tuesday morning. Lynn sat in the back row of her homeroom class, half listening as Principal Rodriguez spoke over the crackling intercom system. She was thinking about the Chopin piece she'd been struggling with, mentally working through a tricky passage of notes. "A chance to showcase your unique abilities," the principal was saying. "Sign-ups will be posted outside the auditorium today through Friday. The actual show will be held 3 weeks from now." Lynn's attention snapped, back to the present when she heard the word abilities. Something stirred inside her, a tiny spark of an idea that both excited and terrified her. "You should totally do it," whispered May, the only person at school Lynn would call a friend. May was a quiet girl who spent most of her time reading fantasy novels and drawing elaborate dragons in her notebook margins. "You're amazing at piano," Lynn shook her head. "No way, nobody here cares about classical music." "So? It's a talent show, not a popularity contest." But in Riverdale High, everything was a popularity contest. The hallways had invisible but rigid boundaries. Athletes and cheerleaders claimed the center, with everyone else pushed to the edges. Lynn had mastered the art of walking those edges, keeping her head down, attracting as little attention as possible. Throughout the day, the talent show was all anyone talked about. The basketball captain planned a slam dunk routine. The cheerleaders were organizing a special performance. 2 boys from the wrestling team were apparently going to do a comedy skit. It's basically going to be a sports showcase with some jokes thrown in, May sighed as they sat together at lunch. Boring. Lynn poked at her cafeteria mac and cheese. The spark of an idea was growing, despite her attempts to extinguish it. What if she did sign up? What if she played her piano piece in front of everyone? The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety, but there was something appealing about it too. My grandma used to say that music could build bridges, she said quietly. What kind of bridges? They asked. Between people. Between worlds, Lynn struggled to explain. She said music speaks a language everyone can understand, even if they don't know they're listening. That afternoon, Lynn found herself standing in front of the sign-up sheet outside the auditorium. Only a handful of names were there so far, all people from the popular crowds. She gripped her pencil, hand shaking slightly. You're not seriously signing up, are you? The voice came from behind her. Lynn didn't need to turn around to know it belonged to Tyler, the basketball team's point guard and one of the most popular boys in school. She could feel her cheeks heating up, but she forced herself to stay calm. Maybe, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Tyler laughed. What's your talent? Being invisible? His friends chuckled. Lynn felt a flare of anger, not just at Tyler but at herself for caring what he thought. She wrote her name on the sheet, adding piano performance next to it. Piano? Like classical music. Tyler's eyebrows shot up. Didn't know we had a grandma in our grade. More laughter. Lynn capped her pen, turned around and walked away, trying to look more confident than she felt. Inside, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Hey, I was just joking, Tyler called after her, but Lynn kept walking. That evening, she couldn't focus on practice. Her fingers kept fumbling over notes she normally played with ease. After an hour of frustration, she closed the piano lid and went to find her mom, who was folding laundry in the living room. I signed up for the school talent show, Lynn blurted out, her mother's hand stilled on a towel. That's wonderful. What will you play? I was thinking Chopin's Ballade No. 1, but... Lynn hesitated. Maybe that's too much. The kids at school, they already think I'm weird. Her mother set down the laundry and patted the couch beside her. When Lynn sat down, she took her daughter's hands, the fingers slightly calloused from years of playing. Do you remember when you were little, and you used to dance around the living room whenever I played old records? You didn't care who was watching. You just felt the music. Lynn smiled faintly at the memory. I was a kid then. It's different now, is it? Music is part of who you are. Being afraid to share that is like being afraid to show your own face. Her mother squeezed her hands. Play what makes your heart sing. The right people will hear it. The days leading up to auditions passed in a blur of school, practice, and increasingly vivid anxiety dreams where Lynn showed up to perform only to find the piano had turned into a swimming pool, or her fingers had been replaced with spaghetti. Despite the nightmares, she practiced harder than ever, determined to get the Chopin piece perfect. Audition day arrived on a bright Wednesday afternoon. Actual performances would be held based on these auditions. Not everyone who tried out would make it to the show. Lynn wore her favorite blue sweater for luck and arrived at the auditorium 15 minutes early. Sheet music clutched to her chest. The room was already buzzing with students. Some were stretching in dance clothes, others were testing microphones or setting up props. Mr. Winters, the music teacher, sat at a small table with Ms. Garcia, the drama teacher, both holding clipboards. Check out the piano girl, someone whispered loudly as Lynn walked in. She pretended not to hear, making her way to the corner where the school's old upright piano sat like an island of calm in the chaos. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing down, just feeling their shape. The piano wasn't great. It was out of tune in spots and some keys stuck if you didn't hit them just right. But it would have to do. Mr. Winters called the auditions to order. They would go alphabetically by last name, which meant Lynn would be somewhere in the middle. She sat in the back row, trying to calm her nerves by mentally playing through her piece, fingers moving slightly on her lap. The first few acts were what you'd expect: a girl singing a popular song, two friends doing a dance routine they'd clearly learned from a video online, a boy showing off soccer ball tricks. Each got polite applause, with louder cheers coming from their respective friend groups. Lynn was so focused on her own thoughts that she almost missed her name being called. Lynn Chen, you're up. The walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of her life. She could hear whispers and giggles, could feel eyes following her. As she sat down, adjusting the bench to the right height, the side door of the auditorium banged open. A group of boys from the basketball team sauntered in, Tyler among them. They must have just finished practice, still in their gym clothes, faces flushed. They took seats in the middle of the auditorium, not bothering to be quiet about it. "Sorry we're late," Tyler called out to the teachers. "Coach kept us overtime." Mr. Winters frowned but didn't say anything. Ms. Garcia just motioned for Lynn to begin whenever she was ready. Lynn placed her sheet music on the stand, though she had the piece memorized. It was a comfort, something to look at besides the faces in the audience. She took a deep breath, positioned her hands, and... "Piano? Seriously?" Tyler's voice carried clearly through the auditorium. "What is this, the 1800s? A ripple of laughter spread through his friends. One of them mimicked playing piano with exaggerated movements, hands flapping wildly in the air. "That's enough," Ms. Garcia said sharply. "Show some respect." The boys quieted down, but Lynn could still hear them snickering. Her hands were trembling now, hovering over the keys. The notes of Chopin's ballade that had been so clear in her mind moments ago now seemed jumbled. Out of reach, she glanced at the exit door, suddenly wanting nothing more than to run through it and never look back. She caught sight of May in the third row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Behind her, most students looked bored or amused at her discomfort. Tyler and his friends weren't even trying to hide their mockery now, one of them pretending to fall asleep. Mr. Winters cleared his throat. "Whenever you're ready, Lynn." The problem was she wasn't ready. Not for this. Not for the judgment and ridicule. In all her practicing, she'd imagined playing for people who wanted to listen, who might appreciate what she had to offer. She hadn't prepared for an audience determined to dismiss her before she'd played a single note. Her grandmother's voice floated through her memory. Music speaks when words fail. And then her mother's. "Play what makes your heart sing." Lynn closed her eyes, trying to find her center. The auditorium faded away, the snickering, the stares, even the teachers with their clipboards. She thought of all the hours at the piano, the joy of losing herself in music, the way her fingers knew the keys like old friends. When she opened her eyes again, she still saw the same scene before her, the shabby school auditorium, the bored and hostile audience. But something inside her had shifted. She placed her fingers on the keys, the familiar cool ivory against her skin. For a split second, doubt crept in again. The Chopin piece was difficult, emotional, nuanced. Would any of them even understand what she was trying to say with it? Lynn hesitated, her fingers poised above the opening notes. A decision was forming in her mind, one that would change everything in the next few moments. She just wasn't sure yet if she had the courage to make it. Time seemed to stretch as Lynn sat at the piano, aware of every breath, every whisper, every shuffle in the auditorium. The Chopin piece she'd practiced for weeks now felt impossibly heavy, like trying to lift a mountain with just her fingertips. She could hear Tyler and his friends still snickering, could feel the weight of everyone's stares. "We don't have all day," someone called from the back. Lynn looked down at her hands, these hands that knew the keyboard so intimately, that could coax beauty from ivory and wood. Right now they felt frozen, useless. She glanced at her sheet music, the familiar notes swimming before her eyes. She thought of all the times she'd played this piece at home, how it made her feel when she hit the emotional climax. Powerful, alive, completely herself. But that feeling seemed a million miles away now, in this dusty auditorium with its out-of-tune piano and hostile audience. "Do you need a minute, Lynn?" Mr. Winters asked, his voice gentle. She shook her head. What she needed wasn't time, it was courage. Or maybe something else entirely. And then, in a moment of clarity, Lynn understood. She'd been approaching this all wrong. She'd been trying to make them listen to her world without first finding a bridge to theirs. Her grandmother's words echoed again. Music speaks when words fail. But to speak, you need a common language. She took a deep breath, closed her sheet music and set it aside. For a heartbeat, she wasn't sure what she was going to do. Then her fingers found the opening notes to Daylight, a popular song that had been playing nonstop on the radio for months. Everyone knew it. Everyone loved it. Even Tyler, who had his tough guy image to maintain, had been caught humming it in the hallway last week. The familiar melody filled the auditorium, and Lynn could feel the shift immediately. The snickering stopped. A few people sat up straighter. She saw May's eyes widen in surprise. But Lynn wasn't just playing the song as it was written. As she moved through the first verse, she began to add her own flourishes, deeper bass notes, more complex chord structures. By the time she reached the chorus, she was reinterpreting it completely, pulling in classical elements that transformed the simple pop tune into something richer. It was like watching a pencil sketch turn into a full-color painting right before your eyes. The melody remained recognizable, but it was filled with new depth, new emotion. Lynn's fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, no longer shaking. She chanced a quick look up. The basketball boys weren't laughing anymore. Tyler's mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on her hands as they moved across the keyboard. Other students were leaning forward in their seats. Mr. Winters had a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lynn felt something unlock inside her, a door opening, to a room she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just playing now. She was speaking, saying things with music she could never put into words. As she approached the bridge of the song, Lynn made another split-second decision. She began to weave in elements of the Chopin piece she'd originally planned to play. The transition was seamless, the modern pop song bleeding into the 19th century composition like they were written to complement each other. The auditorium had gone completely silent except for the music. Even the usual shuffling and whispering had stopped. Lynn was vaguely aware of someone filming her on a phone, but she didn't care. She was somewhere else now, in that magical space where there was nothing but herself and the music. She finished with a flourish that combined both pieces, the final notes hanging in the air like the last words of a story. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Lynn's heart was pounding in her ears. Had she made a terrible mistake? Should she have stuck with her original plan? Then someone started clapping, May, of course. But others quickly joined in. Even Ms. Garcia was on her feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Mr. Winters was nodding, making notes on his clipboard. That was... Tyler started to say, then seemed at a loss for words. He caught Lynn's eye and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Lynn felt lightheaded as she stood up from the piano bench. She hadn't realized how much tension she'd been holding until it released, leaving her slightly wobbly. That was unexpected, Mr. Winters said as she walked past his table, in the best possible way. Ms. Garcia was more effusive. You're definitely in the show. That was incredible, Lynn. Lynn mumbled a thank you and hurried back to her seat, her cheeks burning. Part of her wanted to run straight home and tell her parents what had happened, how she'd thrown away weeks of preparation and somehow ended up with something better. The remaining auditions passed in a blur. Lynn barely registered the other performances, still replaying her own in her mind. Had she really done that, just created something new on the spot? After the last student performed, a boy doing surprisingly good magic tricks, Mr. Winters stood up to address them all. Thank you all for your auditions. We'll post the final lineup for the talent show on Monday. Not everyone will make the cut, but we appreciate everyone who had the courage to try out today. As students began filing out of the auditorium, Lynn gathered her unused sheet music. She was about to follow May toward the exit when Tyler approached her, hands shoved in his pockets. Hey, he said, looking uncomfortable. Lynn braced herself. Hey, that was not what I expected. He shuffled his feet. Where did you learn to play like that? I've been taking lessons since I was 6. No, I mean that song. The way you changed it, Lynn shrugged. I just heard it that way in my head. Tyler nodded slowly. It was cool. Really cool. He seemed to be struggling with what to say next. Sorry about, before. When we were laughing. It wasn't exactly a full apology, but Lynn could see it cost him something to say even that much. His friends were waiting by the door, watching them talk with obvious curiosity. It's okay, she said, though it wasn't, not really. But she understood something now that she hadn't before. Their mockery hadn't been about her, not exactly. It had been about fear of the unfamiliar, of anything that didn't fit neatly into their world. Are you going to play that in the actual show? Tyler asked. Lynn hadn't thought that far ahead. Her mind had been so focused on just getting through the audition. I don't know. Maybe something like it. You should, he said with surprising earnestness. It was like, you made classical music not boring. He winced. No offense. Despite everything, Lynn found herself laughing. None taken. As Tyler walked away to join his waiting friends, May bounced over, eyes wide with excitement. What did he say? Are you friends now? More importantly, what got into you up there? That was amazing. Lynn smiled, feeling a strange new confidence. I don't know. I just decided to try something different. Different is an understatement. You practically set the piano on fire. They pushed through the auditorium doors into the hallway, which was crowded with students heading home for the day. Lynn noticed several people looking at her, some even smiling or nodding in her direction. It was a strange feeling, being seen, really seen after years of blending into the background. So what now? May asked as they headed toward their lockers. Are you going to keep mixing pop and classical? Start a revolution? Become a famous pianist who transforms how music is categorized? Lynn laughed at her friend's enthusiasm. I'm just going to make it through the talent show first. But as they walked, Lynn's mind was racing ahead. The experience at the piano had awakened something in her. A realization that boundaries in music were more fluid than she'd been taught. Classical, pop, jazz. They weren't separate islands, but connected continents in the same musical world. Her grandmother had been right about music building bridges, but Lynn hadn't understood until today that sometimes you had to build those bridges yourself. At home that evening, Lynn sat at her piano, fingers hovering over the keys. Her parents were still at work and the house was quiet. She thought about what had happened in the auditorium, the initial mockery, the moment of doubt, and then the unexpected turn. She began to play, starting with Chopin but then weaving in elements of other styles. A jazz rhythm here, a pop chord progression there. It was like speaking a new language, or maybe an ancient one that she was just rediscovering. She played for nearly an hour, exploring this new territory. When she finally stopped, her fingers aching pleasantly, she knew what she wanted to do for the talent show. It wouldn't be just another rendition of Daylight with classical elements. It would be something new entirely, a piece that was truly hers. Lynn closed the piano lid and went to find her notebook. She had ideas to jot down, a composition to start sketching out. For the first time, she wasn't just interpreting someone else's musical thoughts. She was creating her own. As she wrote, Lynn thought about Tyler and his friends, about Mr. Winters and Ms. Garcia, about all the people who would be watching her at the talent show. But mostly she thought about herself, the quiet girl who had found her voice not by speaking louder, but by speaking in a way that made people want to listen. 3 weeks wasn't much time to compose and perfect an original piece. But as Lynn scribbled notes and chord progressions in her notebook, she felt certain of one thing. Whatever she created, it would be worth hearing. And this time, when she sat down at the piano in front of the school, there would be no hesitation, no fear, only music, and the bridges it could build. The 3 weeks leading up to the talent show passed in a blur of school. Piano practice and late nights hunched over sheet music. Lynn had never worked harder on anything in her life. Creating her own piece, a true blend of classical techniques and modern sensibilities, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Some days the music flowed easily, her pencil barely able to keep up with the melodies in her head. Other days she'd sit at the piano for hours playing the same section over and over, unable to find the right notes to express what she wanted to say. You need to sleep, her mother said one night, finding Lynn still at the piano well past midnight. The music will still be there in the morning. Lynn knew her mother was right, but she also felt a sense of urgency she'd never experienced before. The talent show wasn't just a school event anymore. It had become something more personal, more important. It was her chance to be heard, really heard, maybe for the first time. At school, things had shifted in subtle ways. Lynn wasn't suddenly popular, but she noticed people looking at her differently. A video of her audition had circulated among students, filmed by someone on their phone. Random kids she'd never spoken to would mention it in the hallways. Are you doing something different for the actual show? A girl from her math class asked. You know Tyler, right? He wouldn't shut up about your piano thing in gym class, said another. Even her teachers seemed to see her in a new light. Her English teacher stopped her after class one day to ask about the talent show, saying he'd heard from Mr. Winters that she was one to watch. It was strange being noticed after years of blending into the background. Part of Lynn liked it, but another part found it overwhelming. Sometimes she'd eat lunch alone in the music room just to have a moment of quiet. The only person who treated her exactly the same was May, who remained steadfastly supportive but also refreshingly normal. Don't let it go to your head, May teased as they walked home one day. Next thing you know, you'll be demanding green M&Ms in your dressing room like a real diva. Lynn laughed, grateful for the friend who had been there before any viral videos or hallway compliments. The night before the talent show, Lynn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through her piece in her head. She'd named it Bridges, partly for her grandmother's words about music building connections between people, and partly because the composition itself was a bridge between musical styles. Her phone buzzed with a text from May. "Go to sleep. You need rest to wow everyone tomorrow." Lynn smiled and texted back a simple, "Trying." She must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing she knew, her alarm was blaring and sunlight was streaming through her window. It was Friday, talent show day. The morning passed in a foggy haze. Lynn went through the motions of her classes, but couldn't have told you what any of her teachers said. Lunch was a missed opportunity. Her stomach was too knotted to eat more than a few bites of her sandwich. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Not play piano," May said, pushing an apple toward her. "At least eat this. You need energy." Lynn took a reluctant bite. "What if I mess up? What if I forget the middle section? What if everyone hates it? Then the world ends and we all die fiery deaths," May said flatly. When Lynn glared at her, she softened. "Look, you've been working on this for weeks. You know it inside and out, and even if you do make a mistake, most people won't even notice. They'll just be impressed that you can play anything at all." The talent show was scheduled for the last 2 periods of the day, with the whole school attending. As Lynn made her way to the auditorium after lunch, she could feel the excitement in the air. For most students, it was simply a break from regular classes. For the performers, it was much more. Backstage was organized chaos. The drama club kids were helping set up, running around with clipboards and headsets, taking their roles very seriously. Lynn found a corner to sit in, going through her sheet music one last time. Though she had the piece memorized by now, Mr. Winters gathered all the performers for a pep talk, reminding them about stage etiquette and the order of the show. Lynn would be performing 9th out of 12 acts. Not quite at the end, but late enough that the waiting would be torture. As the auditorium began to fill with students and teachers, the noise level rose. Lynn peeked through the curtains and immediately wished she hadn't. The place was packed. Even some parents had shown up, including, she noticed with a mixture of pride and terror, her own mother and father, who must have taken time off work to be there. The first act was a group of boys doing a hip-hop dance routine. They were good. Clearly they'd practiced, and the audience responded with enthusiastic applause and cheers. Next came a girl singing a ballad, her voice sweet and clear. Then a comedy skit, a gymnastics routine, more singing, a surprisingly good juggling act. Lynn's hands grew clammier with each passing performance. She kept flexing her fingers, afraid they'd be too stiff when her turn came. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone backstage could hear it. And then, suddenly it was happening. The drama club kid with the clipboard was motioning her to get ready. "You're up after Sam finishes his magic act," the girl whispered. "Be by the curtain in 2 minutes." Lynn nodded, unable to speak. She watched as Sam pulled a seemingly endless string of scarves from his empty hands, the audience gasping and laughing. All too soon he was taking his bow, and the MC, the student body president, was introducing her. "Next up, we have something a little different. You might think you know what piano music sounds like, but trust me, you haven't heard anything like this before. Please welcome Lynn Chen." Lynn walked onto the stage, the brightness of the lights momentarily disorienting her. The piano, the school's old upright, now positioned center stage, seemed miles away. She made her way to it on wooden legs, very aware of every eye in the auditorium on her. As she sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly, she glanced out at the audience. In the dim light beyond the stage, she could make out May giving her a thumbs up from the 3rd row. Her parents were near the back, her mother clutching her father's arm in anticipation, and there, in the middle section, was Tyler and his basketball friends, watching with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Lynn took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The familiar feel of ivory under her fingertips calmed her slightly. This was her territory. Whatever happened next, she knew how to speak the language of music. She began softly with a simple melody that might have come from a Chopin nocturne, delicate, haunting, classical in every sense. She let the notes hang in the air, establishing a mood of gentle reflection. The audience was completely silent, perhaps expecting a traditional classical piece after all. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Lynn began to shift the rhythm, adding subtle syncopation that hinted at something more contemporary. The melody remained elegant, but underneath it, the left hand started to introduce a more modern chord progression. By the time she reached what would be the chorus in a pop song, the transformation was complete. The classical foundation was still there, but now it supported something entirely new: driving rhythms, unexpected harmonic turns, moments of tension and release that borrowed from jazz and rock as much as from the classical tradition. Lynn lost herself in the music, no longer aware of the audience or the stage or even her own body, beyond her hands on the keys. This was what she loved most about playing, this sense of disappearing into sound, of becoming merely a conduit for something larger than herself. As she approached the climax of the piece, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a cascade of notes that blended a classical cadenza with rock-inspired intensity, she heard something unexpected. Someone in the audience shouted, "Yeah!" It was the kind of spontaneous response you'd hear at a concert, not a school talent show. It broke her concentration for a split second, but then she smiled and leaned into the music even harder, feeding off the energy. The final section of Bridges was Lynn's favorite part. After the technical fireworks of the middle, it returned to something simpler but transformed, the opening melody, but now with all the harmonic richness and rhythmic complexity that had been developed throughout the piece. It felt like coming home, but to a home you'd never seen before yet somehow recognized. As she played the final chord, a simple triad with just a hint of added tension, Lynn felt a curious mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. For a moment after the sound faded, there was complete silence in the auditorium. Lynn kept her head bowed, suddenly afraid to look up, to see how her music had been received. Then the applause started. First just a few people, then more, until it seemed like the whole auditorium had erupted. There were cheers and whistles. Someone was stamping their feet. Lynn finally raised her head and saw something she'd never expected. People were standing. Not everyone, but enough to qualify as a standing ovation. Her parents were on their feet, her mother wiping away tears. May was jumping up and down, clapping wildly. Even some of the teachers had stood up. And there in the middle section, Tyler and several of his basketball teammates were on their feet too, their faces showing genuine appreciation. Lynn stood on shaky legs and gave a small bow, feeling simultaneously like she might float away or collapse on the spot. As she walked off stage, Mr. Winters gave her shoulder a quick squeeze. "That," he said quietly, "is why I teach music." In the wings, Lynn leaned against a wall, trying to process what had just happened. She felt like she'd run a marathon. In a way she had, an emotional one, months in the making with the finish line only now behind her. The rest of the talent show continued, but Lynn barely registered it. She was still in that other world, the one made of sound and feeling, where something new had been born through her hands. Whatever happened next, whether she won any kind of prize, whether people remembered her performance tomorrow or forgot it, didn't seem to matter much. For those 5 minutes on stage, she had said exactly what she wanted to say, in a language uniquely her own, and people had listened. And really, what more could any artist ask for than that? Lynn stood in the crowded hallway outside the auditorium, surrounded by a small group of students she barely knew. The talent show had just ended and everyone was spilling out into the corridors, the excitement of the event still buzzing in the air. Lynn felt oddly disconnected from it all, like she was watching herself from a distance. "That was insane," a boy from her science class was saying. "How long did it take you to write that?" "Where did you learn to play like that?" asked a girl Lynn recognized from the volleyball team. "Are you going to record it? You should put it online." The questions kept coming and Lynn found herself answering automatically, still processing what had happened on stage. It wasn't just that people had applauded, though that had been amazing. It was the feeling she'd had while playing, like she'd finally found her true voice. "Lynn." She turned to see May pushing through the crowd, a huge grin on her face. "There you are, I've been looking everywhere." May threw her arms around Lynn in a fierce hug. "You were incredible. I mean, I knew you were good, but that was next level." Lynn hugged her back, finally starting to feel grounded again. Thanks for being there. I saw you in the audience. As if I'd miss it. May pulled back, studying Lynn's face. How does it feel to be the talk of the school? Before Lynn could answer, her parents appeared, making their way through the hallway crowd. Her father, normally so reserved, was beaming with pride. Her mother had clearly been crying, her eyes still red-rimmed but her smile radiant. "Lynn," her mother said, embracing her. "My beautiful, talented daughter." Her father simply put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed, but Lynn could read a novel in that gesture. Pride, love, and something like vindication for all the sacrifices they'd made for her music. "We should celebrate," he said. "Your choice of restaurant tonight." Lynn was about to answer when Mr. Winters approached, clipboard still in hand. "Lynn, could I speak with you for a moment?" He nodded politely to her parents. "It won't take long." Her parents stepped back and Mr. Winters led Lynn a few feet away from the crowd. "That piece you played," he said, his voice serious. "You composed it yourself?" Lynn nodded, suddenly nervous again. "Yes. Was that okay?" Mr. Winters laughed. "More than okay." "Lynn, I've been teaching music at this school for 15 years and I've never heard anything quite like what you did today. It was original in the truest sense, not just technically proficient but saying something new." Lynn felt warmth spreading through her chest. Coming from Mr. Winters, who had studied at a prestigious conservatory and performed with orchestras before becoming a teacher, this was high praise indeed. "I have a colleague at the community college who runs a summer composition workshop for high school students," he continued. "It's competitive. They only take 12 students each year from across the state. But based on what I heard today, I think you should apply. The deadline is next month. I'd be happy to write you a recommendation." Lynn blinked, trying to absorb what he was saying. A composition workshop? With other students who loved creating music? It sounded like a dream. Thank you. I'd love that." Mr. Winters smiled. "Good. Come see me on Monday and we'll talk details." He glanced over her shoulder. "I think you have more fans waiting to speak with you." Lynn turned to see Tyler standing awkwardly nearby, hands shoved in his pockets, clearly waiting for a chance to talk to her. She was so surprised that she just stared at him for a moment. Mr. Winters gave her shoulder a pat and walked away. Lynn took a deep breath and approached Tyler. "Hey," she said. "Hey." Tyler shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "So, that was pretty cool. What you did up there." "Thanks." Lynn wasn't sure what else to say. A week ago, Tyler wouldn't have given her the time of day. Now he was seeking her out to compliment her. "Some of us are going to get pizza to celebrate the end of the show," he said. "You should come, your friend too." He nodded toward May, who was watching their interaction with undisguised curiosity. Lynn glanced at her parents, who were talking with some other adults nearby. "I think my parents want to take me out to dinner, but thanks for the invitation." Tyler nodded, looking slightly disappointed but not surprised. "Yeah, sure. Makes sense." He hesitated, then added, "But listen, we're having this thing next Friday, just hanging out at my place. You should stop by." Lynn couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. 3 weeks ago, being invited to hang out at Tyler's house would have seemed as likely as being asked to fly to the moon. "I'll think about it," she said, which was the truth. She wasn't sure if she wanted to go or if she'd even feel comfortable there, but it was nice to be asked. Tyler gave her a small nod and rejoined his friends, who were waiting by the exit doors. Lynn watched him go, feeling like she was living in some alternate universe where everything familiar had been slightly rearranged. "Did Tyler just invite you to hang out with the cool kids?" May asked, appearing at her side. "Apparently. Weird, but also kind of awesome." May linked her arm through Lynn's. "The world works in mysterious ways." Lynn's parents were ready to leave, eager to take her to her favorite restaurant to celebrate. As they walked toward the parking lot, her father asked about Mr. Winters. "What did your teacher want to talk about?" Lynn told them about the summer workshop, watching their faces light up with excitement. "That sounds perfect for you," her mother said. "Of course you'll apply." "We'll make it work," her father added, and Lynn knew he was already calculating how to afford the tuition if she got in. She felt a rush of love for them both, for their unwavering support even when her passion had seemed impractical or strange to others. The weekend passed in a happy blur. Lynn spent hours at the piano, inspired by her success to try new compositions, to push the boundaries of what she thought she could create. Relatives called to congratulate her after her parents spread the news, and even her older cousin, who was away at college, texted to say he'd seen a video of her performance that someone had shared online. By Monday morning, Lynn was both excited and nervous to return to school. Would things be different now? Would people treat her differently? Or would everything go back to normal, her performance forgotten in the everyday rush of high school life? She got her answer as soon as she walked through the front doors. People noticed her now. They smiled, waved, said hello as she passed. It wasn't that she was suddenly popular exactly, but she was visible in a way she'd never been before. In music class, Mr. Winters had her stay after to discuss the summer workshop application. He seemed genuinely excited about her prospects, offering to help her select pieces for her portfolio and to coach her through the interview process if she made it to that stage. "You have a gift, Lynn," he said. "But more importantly, you have something to say with your music. That's much rarer." At lunch, Lynn and May sat at their usual table, but were soon joined by a girl from the drama club who wanted to know if Lynn would consider playing for the spring musical. "We usually just use recorded tracks, but live music would be so much better," the girl explained. "And after what you did at the talent show, well, you'd be perfect." Lynn was flattered, though uncertain if she'd have time with her regular lessons, homework, and now preparing for the workshop application. She promised to think about it. "You're going to need a bigger lunch table soon," May teased after the drama club girl left. "Your fan club is growing." Lynn rolled her eyes, but she couldn't deny that things were changing. Not just around her, but within her. She felt more confident, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. The talent show had been a turning point, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. As they were leaving the cafeteria, Lynn spotted Tyler and his friends at their usual table. Tyler caught her eye and gave her a nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, just a simple gesture, but it represented a shift in her world that still felt surreal. The biggest surprise came Wednesday afternoon, when Coach Rivera stopped her in the hallway. Coach Rivera was the basketball coach, a former college player who was utterly dedicated to his team and generally oblivious to anything that wasn't sports-related. "Chen," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Got a minute?" Lynn nodded, wondering what on earth the basketball coach could want with her. "Heard your performance the other day. Got me thinking." He crossed his arms. "The team's got a big game coming up against Westfield. Real important one. We usually play music during warm-ups, gets the crowd going, gets the boys pumped up. Been using the same playlist for years." Lynn waited, not sure where this was heading. "Thought maybe you could play something. Live. Before the game and during halftime." He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, but Lynn could tell it was. "Something with energy, like what you did at the talent show. Might give us a home court edge." Lynn was speechless. Playing at a basketball game? The very center of Riverdale, High's social universe? It was the last thing she'd ever expected. I'd have to think about it," she managed to say. "I'd need to write something new, something that would work for a game." Coach Rivera nodded. "Take a couple days. Let me know by Friday." He started to walk away, then turned back. "You've got talent, Chen. Wouldn't have believed piano could sound like that." As he strode off down the hallway, Lynn leaned against the wall trying to process what had just happened. First Mr. Winters with the workshop, then the drama club, and now the basketball team. It was like her music had opened doors she hadn't even known existed. That evening, she told her parents about Coach Rivera's request over dinner. "Basketball?" Her mother looked confused. "They want classical piano at a basketball game?" "Not classical," Lynn explained. "Something more like what I played at the talent show. Something with energy that blends different styles." Her father considered this. "It's an interesting opportunity, bringing music to people who might not usually listen to it." Lynn nodded. That was exactly what appealed to her about the idea. It would be like building another bridge. Later, she sat at her piano, fingers hovering over the keys as she thought about what kind of piece would work for a basketball game. It would need to be exciting, driving, something to get people on their feet.